what they really are probably cripplingly socially awkward. When we say autism, that's what we mean. Like, these people don't have special interests. In all seriousness, like, if you need Adderall to pursue your special interest, it's not a special interest.
All right, what's up, everybody? This is Other Life. I am Justin Murphy. I just wanted to let you know that I write a free newsletter to thousands of people every week. It's where I publish my best work, I share events that you can come to, and much more. We have an insane private community around the newsletter, and it's free. Go check it out. Just go to otherlife.co. That's otherlife.co. When you subscribe, I'm going to send you a folder of PDFs that contain all of my personal highlights from a bunch of my favorite books that I've read over the years. So you'll get a million insights after just a few minutes of browsing these PDFs, really. They're really special to me, and I just figured I'd share them with you all. So that's otherlife.co, otherlife.co.
I would say the whole Thiel bucks meme is like 99% false. I would say like 9 out of 10 cases where you hear this person got Thiel bucks, it's not true at all. For some reason, that meme has so much traction. People love to say that. Why do you think that is? Like, why is that such a hot meme?
God, it might be because of Gawker, right? Is that the genesis of the Thiel bucks?
Ooh, we're going back internet history here. So yeah, how do you think that Gawker conflict kind of put Thiel on the map in a way that made him like culturally relevant?
Yeah, no, it's okay. So it's a combination of that, and then the revelation that he was friends with Curtis Yarvin. And it's a combination. But why doesn't Tyler Cowen get any shit, right? Like, Tyler, it's super transparent, Emergent Ventures, and it's an awesome thing, and he funds like tons of like really smart people. But it's essentially what people are accusing Thiel of doing. It's just, you submit an application.
Do you ever get Cowen bucks?
Yeah, I have.
You did? Oh, you did?
Yeah, I have Cowen bucks.
Dude, I never got a single Thiel buck, and I never got a single Cowen buck either.
You have to apply.
No, I did.
You did?
Yeah, Tyler Cowen rejected me 2 times.
Apply a 3rd time.
No, I'm just going to shout him out on the podcast, and he's going to become an arch nemesis of mine, I think.
No, you probably just didn't frame your project.
No,
well.
I'm just kidding. No love lost. But no, people. You know what? People are always accusing me of like having secret investors, being on the Thiel bucks. But I'm very proud about this because I've never received a single fucking dollar of investment or grant from really anyone. I mean, I've had friends who have I've played positive sum games with people and people who have been, helped me out along the way, as we all do. Right. But I've never received a single fucking dollar from anyone. And not for lack of asking. I mean, I never asked Thiel for anything, but I did ask for the Tyler Cowen bucks 2 separate times, and on 2 separate times he said no. So, but you're on the Cowen stipend.
Yeah, I applied for a grant. I got the grant, and that's about it.
What's the trick? How do you get money? How do you get money from rich people?
I don't actually know. I think maybe my project was interesting to him. I don't want to blow up what the project is, but
it's not what you're currently working on. It's something new.
It's part of what I'm working on. It's an extension of that. But I had this sort of like wacky theory with Emmett Penny, who I think you also know.
Yeah, he's a member of the community.
Yeah, and we were like, yeah, let's apply for a grant to flesh this theory out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But you can't talk about it. Well,
only because I think it's a really good idea, and I don't want to see like a watered down version of it somewhere else.
Sure. Okay.
Which is I sound so up my own ass there.
No, that's cool. That's cool. All right. Well, so you are, I think, the very first person to be on the podcast 3 times. How does that make you feel?
I feel like that's the role I play online.
Oh, in general? Like you've been on other people's podcasts many times?
I'm sort of the like weird, I feel like we're actually similar in this way where it's just like we're like the unsinkable Molly Browns of Twitter. Like we're kind of involved in everything and no one really knows why.
Do you feel like you say yes too much?
I say yes to everything.
Yeah. Do you feel like you cheapen your brand by going on too many podcasts?
Not by going on too many podcasts, but I've definitely said yes to projects that I thought were cool, but I was like certainly not the right person to do it. And then it's like come back to haunt me.
Oh, okay.
And people are like, oh, well, you did this, in 2016. And I actually found that out from finding your Tumblr, and your full legal name, which I'll, tweet out. And that is actually, it conflicts with this project you're working on in 2022.
Right. I say yes to just about every podcast invitation I ever receive.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to reevaluate that. I think it's not sensible.
I've definitely been on some terrible ones.
It's not, yeah, that's part of the problem. That can be the problem, but it's more just like it sucks up time. But two, I do think that I'm kind of more leaning towards nowadays. I like a style that's a little bit more like reserved and hidden and hard to get to. Just because it does suck up a lot of time, and I think it does kind of cheapen your brand a little bit.
It could be good at first. Like, was it you who said like there's two ways to be successful? You can either be prolific or good or something.
maybe. Well, no, I think there's some. I forget if I ever said that, but I think there's truth to that. That it's like the old quote or adage that quantity has a quality all of its own.
Yeah.
I do think that you can kind of lock into a certain amount of volume that more or less compensates for quality. Like if you suck but you do enough, you can kind of like grow that way.
Yeah, just last person standing. I feel like that's been my my strategy. Like, am I the absolute best at what I do? No way, but I do it the most. So
okay, I like that. So let's talk about this a little bit. Why don't you give us an update on all of your projects? You were on the podcast a couple times, so people probably remember you from the past. You write a Substack called Default Wisdom at DefaultFriend.substack.com. But you also do a bunch of other things. I think you're kind of like me in that you're kind of always experimenting with different things. So what is your current focus? Like, how has your kind of internet project evolved, and where is it at right now? How would you describe the main focus of your work right now?
I think I'll start just taking people through the history.
Yeah.
Why I was on your podcast the first time was I did a short film about prostitutes in Thailand, and I never released it because the location was very hostile to me, and I just felt like it cursed the footage, and that's that. But
like that's why you decided not to publish it, because you had just bad experiences.
It was the most hostile set anyone involved had ever been on.
What do you mean by hostile set? Like the people working on the film like hated each other? Or?
Okay, so our director of photography was extremely talented, but he thought it was his film. So he like changed the color palette that, we had talked about. He went way over budget. He was super mean to everyone. And then the people who owned the location that we shot at, they were behind on their rent by like $12,000, and they thought that I was rich, which I wasn't. I like worked like 3 or 4 jobs to save up for this film. Like I was working so much that I was like really on the verge of a nervous breakdown. So they thought I was rich, and they were, this is my theory at least. So they're like, okay, we're just going to say that this chick like destroyed our apartment and try to sue her or something.
Okay. So you had this like nightmare kind of social problem.
They accidentally revealed to me that they were behind on their rent. So I was like, I had gotten insurance, thank God, but I said this to the insurance company, like, these people are, $12,000 behind on rent. So I think that might have something to do with what's going on. And then the proof that they sent that we had destroyed their apartment was like super insufficient. But I was like kind of scared of these guys for a while.
Well, and this is in Thailand?
No, it was fictional.
Okay.
But I like recreated, Thailand and.
Wow. So that project did complete. Like you have a finished film.
I have a finished film.
And you just never published it.
Yeah, because I'm just like, it was just the energy was so bad. And then also like the storyline is, if I think I'm cancel bait now, this is before I had sort of like a consciousness. And I think like I tried to sort of like mask it by like saying sex worker instead of prostitute, but it was like still really like, honestly, like even not accepting like the woke premise, it's still kind of offensive. Like it's offensive by my own metrics. I'm like, I was too young and.
But it had a kind of sex negative attitude.
I don't even want to say what the plot is because it's like bizarre.
And edgy, like in a way that
it's edgy in the way where it's like clearly I was like working something out through the film, and it like some kind of anxiety that I had, and I wasn't aware of that. Like I showed it to my mom and she was like, what happened to you? Like, who are you angry at?
Well, this is great because you're building lore for the film, and so when it eventually comes out, it's going to be like. It sounds really interesting now that you're like the way you explain why it never came to fruition.
Yeah,
you're selling it amazingly. Like it's
thank you.
Well, it sounds like provocative. It sounds like dangerous. It sounds like all this weird kind of like social energy behind it. So I feel like you should release it.
Yeah, and it won a couple of contests. The screenplay at least. And like the comments that I would get back were like, this was really good, but I feel like I need to take a shower now. But I thought it was like, oh, because it's a horror film. So I was like, oh, it's really scary. And like, I was a successful, horrorist, but also, also the W also, because it's about sex work.
So you have this film, you completed it, but you haven't released it.
This was like even pre-DefaultFriend.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So
what comes after that?
All right. So after that, then why was I on the podcast the second time?
I don't know. Just hanging out.
Just to chat. So who knows? I mean, like, who knows what happened from that point? That's a wash.
I mean, we should pause on the fact of how long ago this all was. Like, these are multiple years ago, like several years ago.
Yeah,
basically.
I think this was 2018.
And the whole like making friends on the internet thing now is very common now. It's kind of been normalized in a way.
Yeah.
But back then it was like still kind of new. Like I just want to kind of draw attention to we're OGs in this game, basically, you and I.
Yeah, I mean, I have internet friends from before the 2010s even.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know, I've had people I met on Neopets at my apartment.
And back the second time you were on the podcast, were you even doing a newsletter at that time?
I was. The newsletter, so it was events for a little bit, and then it was advice when COVID happened. And then I switched to just like whatever the hell I was thinking about. And then I just kept thinking about the internet, so it became sort of de facto about the internet. And then someone asked me, Forever Mag asked me and Delicious Tacos to do an advice column that went really well. And then we just kept doing it.
Okay, that's recent though, right? That just started recently?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the story with Forever Mag? Who is that? What is it all about? I heard about them, but I don't know anything.
I don't think they're a lit mag per se, but I think they're almost a lit mag. New York and LA. And yeah,
where's the money coming from?
Probably their own pockets is my.
They're trust funders or what?
No, I think they just. I mean, I don't really know them, but my guess would be it's a passion project. I could be wrong, and I think people buy it, so it's probably
okay. Well, in my mental model of the cultural economy right now, there's really only three options. There's either maybe four. It's either Thiel bucks or Cowan bucks, but those are the same bucks basically. I think so. It's either Thiel bucks or it's a VC. Or it's a profitable business.
I think Cowan
or it's trust fund. Or it's trust fund. That's
VC is all one category.
Okay.
That's what, because that's the thing about Thiel bucks. It's like anyone with money at all funds projects that they think are interesting. If you have that,
right. Well, I would make a distinction between kind of grants from high net worth people who just want to fund things they want to see in the world versus VC stuff that they think they're going to get an ROI on it.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Because there is an interesting distinction. Like if you look at like Praxis, for instance, right? Like that is a VC-backed startup. Presumably the people who invested in Praxis think it's going to be profitable for them in the long run.
Yeah, but they're not in the same category.
No, that's right. That's right. But they're kind of in our circles. It's kind of like a social thing. So it is kind of interesting actually how the lines are starting to blur in a way. So okay, so there's Thiel bucks, there's VC, then there's profitable businesses like mine basically, and then there's trust funders. So we don't know about Forever Mag anyway. What's like their niche, or like how would you describe their subculture?
I don't know them super well, so I don't want to miscategorize them. I think, and I'm not sure, that they're in sort of the like New York downtown scene that Mike Crumpler.
Yeah. So how much do you know about all that?
Not a lot.
This is like what they call the Dime Square crew, I think, right?
Right. Which feels just like a spiritual successor to what's always been there, alt-lit, and then,
Right, and this is something you and I know more about. You've written about this a little bit, and I think you and I are of the age where the whole alt-lit thing back in the day is the closest kind of comparison case to this current iteration of the New York, like, alt-writer scene or whatever. So this is interesting to unpack. So this is something I wanted to actually ask you about. You've written about this, what you call the culture of confession. The people like Marie Calloway and Tao Lin and these people. What is that culture of confession? What is the essence of it? And what do you find of interest there in terms of what's changed? Because I thought your essay on that was interesting.
I think it was like a stream of consciousness style that was like people describe it as affectless, which I know Tao Lin he's like, there's tons of emotion in my work. What are you talking about? But I think it's like if you take if you're on Adderall and you're constantly sort of updating your Facebook status with everything that's happening in your life. But if you made that literature,
Right.
I think that's alt lit.
Did you participate in this moment at all?
I tried, but I was too much of a fucking dork.
Oh, were you?
I mean, this is my thing. Speaking of Mike Crumpler, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I'm like always there, but I'm like, there's something almost like too autistic about me where I can't like, they kind of know I'm an outsider. And it's like, it's almost as though like, there's something about like, you just have to declare yourself part of a group to be part of a group mostly. But there's something that stops me. So I always stick out like a sore thumb.
But this is what's interesting about the current moment compared to that period is that now you're much more rewarded for being truly independent and being productive on your own. Whereas back at that time, there was still like gatekeeping. Like I was tangentially involved in it. I was friends with some people like who were kind of big in that scene or whatever. I'll never forget that we had a reading at our warehouse in Philadelphia one time that Steve Rogenbuck was at. And I think like Megan Boyle came through and people like that. And I think I wrote a few articles in like Thought Catalog back at that time. So I was like not deep in it, but I was tangential to it. And the big difference between then and now, in my opinion, is that back then you did still have to kind of ingratiate yourself in a scene.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like if you're smart or interesting or weird or creative and you have the discipline to just like churn out newsletters, you can basically rise to the top in a way that you couldn't back then.
I don't know if I agree. I think you still kind of need to ingratiate yourself to a scene. You can create your own scene with enough persistence, but that was true then too.
Well, I mean, I'm not bragging or anything, but I feel like I'm truly not a member of any tribe or scene, and I've never I feel like I just literally don't.
You're an edge case.
Yeah, but there's a lot of edge cases. I feel now.
I don't think so.
Whereas I guess what I'm saying is back at the alt lit time, I felt like you had described it basically. Like I always felt it wasn't. Like my opportunities there were limited because I felt like just a little too, I don't know, independent, or like I never thrived at like ingratiating myself and like climbing social ladders. I always hated that kind of stuff. So I felt back at that time that I wasn't, super excited by it. Whereas now I feel like it's just relatively way more open and way more kind of chaotic and requires less social ingratiation.
That might be true. But I don't know. I think a little bit.
Yeah. So what do you think changed in what you describe as the culture of confession? You talk about how things have changed since then. And where has that culture of confession gone and why? Speak about that a little bit.
Well, I think it's coming back. And I think that it probably had been percolating. And I didn't realize this until the NPCC Film Fest, right? And if you read a lot of the writing of the people who were involved with that film festival.
And did you go to that?
I did.
Okay.
And like sort of the stuff that was read at Angel Fest, which was a poetry reading that was organized as a part of, which was, I had a piece read there, but the gentleman who read it for me, because I was too nervous to get up there on my own, screamed it like it was death metal or something. It has like a similar sort of like, it's informed by being online a lot, but it's like it almost feels like a little inauthentic. I think it's more authentic now than it was then. In 2008. Very sort of amused by their own bravery to reference Discord servers or whatever,
Interesting. So you think compared to people like Tao Lin, it's more kind of awkward and autistic and self-referential, or less?
They're both awkward and autistic and self-referential. However, Tao Lin is not an example of this. I would say he really, of those writers, he really was in a class of his own. And
he's cool.
Yeah, Marie Calloway too. But some of the other writers, like the names we don't even remember, would sort of like affect being very online when they really weren't, because like being on Facebook a lot and then being very online, they're sort of two different things, especially then.
Interesting. Say more about what you mean by that.
Like there was like, are you like addicted to social media because this is sort of what everyone's mainlining? There's something sort of like still normie about it, or are you like really like online in a way where like you're unintelligible to outsiders? And
Right. So people like Tao and Megan were kind of the early representatives of this, like, because a lot of their writing was kind of like, whatever. I took Adderall, I tweeted 50 times today.
Yeah.
I haven't left the house.
And there was something that felt like very true. And I bought it, right? And not that I didn't believe the sort of like younger, there's a lot of like 15-year-olds involved too. And it wasn't that I didn't believe them.
Back then or now?
Back then.
Right.
I mean, I was still in high school too. But like, it's not that I didn't like believe them, but you kind of could tell that they were like, it was like derivative. And at the time in New York, and I've never been able to articulate this correctly. So this is around the same time that like Silicon Valley's starting to boom again, and you have the app bubble. You have all these young people in tech. And then I don't know if it's even related to that, but there is this sort of like New York artist impulse to sort of be like, I'm interested in tech. I'm so online. And like they kind of weren't actually. It was just sort of saying it. And it shined through in a lot of the writing.
Okay, that's kind of interesting. Now that I think about it, I never made that connection. Now that I think about it, the whole alt-lit thing was very separate from tech.
Yeah.
And not even anti-tech, but just totally distinct. Whereas now they're way closer, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like people like you and I are sociologically way closer to tech and overlapping with tech people. And now there's a lot of kind of tech writers and tech Substack authors. Whereas back then it was very separate, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was super separate. And also like it was people who were sort of like addicted to social media in these alternative like art scenes, people who were like internet poisoned, and then tech. Those were like three different categories that, tech and internet poisoning might overlap. But a lot of these sort of like alt artists were kind of like affecting a certain like, oh, I'm so online and antisocial, and it was not really true.
And how do you feel about it now? Is that kind of false affective attitude or tendency worse now, or just different? Like, how do you think about it?
Or
better maybe. Is it more authentic? Like, are the Gen Z kind of internet like crazy people, are they just like so far gone that they're like on some new shit?
I mean, I think a lot of them are sort of like too amused with the sort of reputation of Gen Z as being like, digitally poisoned in this way where I feel like they're hamming it up for sure.
Yeah.
And it's, they're young, but like, I'm sure I did some analogous of this at that age. But, so my ex-podcast co-host, when I did After the Orgy, which is like I think that can stand alone as its own art piece, a self-contained project. But she wrote this critique of Fuckboy. And it was, she skewered this book.
And remind me, what was that book?
It was about like a Postmates delivery guide. The author had received like a 6-figure advance, which is very rare in publishing now, especially for fiction, especially for a debut book. And it was written in a very specific sort of style. And, I do think that people are more authentic now, but she said that if I'm remembering correctly, there's like people are confusing authenticity and laziness, basically. And it's just like there's no real self-reflection, which I do agree with in a lot of the work. It's like it's just a stream of consciousness without it. A lot of people don't edit their writing.
Like angelicism, you're kind of subtweeting.
No, not at all. I wasn't even thinking of him.
Oh, okay.
But
But that would be an example, right? It's
maybe. Like, I don't know what the angelicism's deal is. I think that he might be they might be very intentional. I've tried to read a couple of posts. I don't totally get it. It's not my...
Yeah. Well, okay. I don't mean to... I'm not throwing shade. I'm like friendly with that person. It's I like them. But there is this trend now to... bad spelling, bad grammar as a flex kind of. And who actually, I think anyway, I mean, and who's like one of the first culprits of this is Bronze Age pervert, like the whole like broken English kind of thing. Like I kind of just think that there's a little too much of this as it's a crutch, basically. It's a cope. It's a way to like not have to stand by the quality of your sentences, basically.
I disagree. Okay. I think BAP probably has a very, I think his natural typing style is probably very distinctive, and it's a way to keep anonymity. And it's also a way so he has a cult following, so it's a way to gatekeep. I think it's actually really smart how he does it. And I think there's actually probably, I don't know angelicism,
Right.
and I also don't know that subculture at all. A lot of the poetry and fiction that I'm referring to are small players, admittedly. I don't even know their names. It's just things that have been sent to me like on like just rando lit mags. Not
Yeah.
even, we were talking about Forever, but like I don't even know if Forever publishes this kind of stuff. Probably
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
honestly. I've read maybe one poem that they've published and I loved it. So it was like,
Yeah.
but I'm talking like just random ass
Okay,
rumors,
gotcha.
right?
Good
Discord servers.
context.
Yeah. But without having the context on angelicism, it's probably a way to create boundaries and sort of put up a fence around, their project and what they're trying to do.
Totally, and I think that's a fair defense. I think the problem is a very common problem where the progenitors are maybe very thoughtful and sophisticated. Like I think Bronze Age Pervert is a very smart man, a very interesting guy for sure. Same thing with angelicism. Same thing with Tao Lin, but then there's all of these kind of like fakers.
Sure.
There's this like long tail of
Yeah,
kind of fakers,
posers.
right? And for that long tail, the bad spelling and grammar is just like this amazing cover for laziness and for and for low quality, frankly. And so that's kind of the self harming aspect of this kind of lackadaisical style.
Yeah.
Is that it creates room for a really lazy culture where quality and shit can't really be separated very easily. So it has these kind of I think very self-limiting effects on the culture that emerges around them.
Yeah, that sounds true. But I mean, like, most people don't want to put in this has been true for a very, very long time. Like most people are just lazy.
Yeah. So, okay, the Substack, is this like your full-time job now? Your
No.
Substack? No. Okay.
No. I work a very normie, like 9 to 5. And I never want to lose that.
Yeah, you find that that's helpful for doing your creative work.
It anchors me,
Yeah.
one, but and I enjoy it. But the other thing is like, this is so fleeting. And I don't know what it hinges on and what powers it. And I don't want to play with fire. And I think I've already flown pretty close to the sun.
Okay, so
Yeah.
meaning you feel that all of your internet writing and your content online is very kind of fragile and could disappear at any moment.
That's true for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I think like, me especially, I don't know if we got this on, we recorded this, but I'd said earlier that like, I'm probably more prolific than I am talented. Eventually that catches up with people.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
you feel like you're not worthy of like going hardcore on this for the long term as a really long term project.
Worthiness is a weird thing, but I feel like I don't, some people could ride on like a cult of personality, which I don't think I can do. It's very, if only for, I don't think I have the charisma, but I also think like I have this Discord server for paid subscribers.
Yeah.
And there's no distance between me and the people who are paying for this Discord server, basically. Like, to me, it's like, I'm like totally myself there, walls down. And I don't think you could be someone who's sort of so fluid, so walls down, and do this full time.
Interesting. Why not?
I think at a certain point you need to put up boundaries, and also that's how you perpetuate success is, thinking that you should be successful. Like sometimes there's a Substack that I really like, and I'm going to say something critical of it, so I'm not going to say what it is.
No, come on.
But, okay, I'll describe and people could context this. There's a young woman she's a leftist. She's like 20 years old, and her content's really interesting and really good. And even though she's like often sort of transparent about her success or even apologetic, well, not apologetic, but like she has a lot of gratitude for it.
She's very big or kind of big or
medium big, and
okay.
I would put money on her becoming like very big, right? Like,
okay.
You kind of can tell that she thinks that she deserves it in a way. Like she can,
Right.
Or she could like envision it at least.
Yeah, hell yeah.
She can envision herself as someone who, has a sort of like parasocial following.
I have to know who. I have to guess. Is it this Anne Helen Peterson chick?
No.
Close? No.
Isn't Anne Helen Peterson like an older Is she?
I think she's our age. I don't know though.
So like in her 30s?
I think. I don't know
Yeah.
though. I think she's quite big actually though.
Yeah.
So who are you? Just tell us.
No, I'm not going to say.
Really? I mean, why?
Yeah, because
You're not being uncharitable.
because it feels like weird somehow to like comment on
Fair enough.
someone like this.
I'll just keep thinking and I'll keep guessing.
Yeah, I'm like armchair psychoanalyzing a person I don't know.
But what you're making a really good point, and it's
Yeah.
important. Like
Yeah.
success on the internet requires real belief that
Yeah.
you're gonna do it, that you deserve it,
Yeah.
that it's your destiny. Like you have to hype yourself up on all that shit.
Speaking of people who've already creeped out, I think like Ayla is actually a good example of this because I think part of the reason she pisses people off is not just the sometimes perplexing nature of her mind, which is very unique, but you could sort of tell she has like a sense of, she has a confidence and a certainty that most people don't have, and that helps propel her success.
Totally.
And that I don't have that certainty. Like there's no audience performer barrier. Like I am, if I'm performing, I'm also in the audience. And I feel like for me, if I'm on a stage, right, I'm constantly looking at the audience and asking, how am I doing? And you cannot do that. Like you need to be like, I'm on a stage, but I can't let on that I know I'm on a stage.
This is really insightful. I think you're absolutely right. There is this kind of mind state you have to click into, which is basically it's the difference between professional and amateur. Basically, is what you're describing. And what you're saying is you self-identify as amateur. You like having it as a hobby. You like having it as a side thing to your main, professional paid work, and that suits you best.
Right. And I mean, it's even more than like liking it. Like, I think, it's very freeing for it to be kind of amateurish.
Right.
But also, I don't know if I could take myself seriously and be like, I'll get phone calls sometimes from journalists because I'm an expert in some certain niche things.
Right.
And I really am the only person who's written about it or studied it. And I still feel like I'm just like some chick with a blog, right? Like why am I being quoted in, even if it's just some local ass newspaper, right? Like it's like it feels,
because it's like the weird independent chick with a blog is like the most powerful agent in the world right now. I mean, really like the weird people who are doing this stuff for fun, coming out of nowhere for for no particular reason, this really like wild, unanchored, disinterested way. That's like the hottest shit in the world, and for good reason, because everything else is fake. Basically, if you're like too instrumental, if you're too professionalized or whatever, it starts to get stale. It starts to get kind of predictable.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that you get those types of things. So I mean, this is very interesting to hear because we haven't talked in like several months or whatever.
Yeah.
And from the outside, it's looked like your project is becoming more professionalized. So it's interesting to hear that that's actually not really the case.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, I'm not going to turn any opportunities down. And part of it is like, there is a sense, I have my own type of arrogance, right? Like I'm very sort of like, oh, I had an idea that seems good. I've got to publish this immediately. So it's like, so it's my idea. So I have like, I timestamped it, which is like a really fucked up sort of way to be. Right.
Yeah, can be. I mean, it's not necessarily bad. I mean,
but that's, that's part of why I'm so prolific, because I'm like, oh my God, I need to bookmark this, for later.
Right. Totally. So that's fascinating. I mean, part of me is, as your friend, I can say this, like, is this just like limiting beliefs? Like, is this just like your way of, not maximizing your potential and not doing the most with what you have in front of you? Because I feel like, if you're just conscious of who you are and what you want, and this is like the truth of your preferences, totally, that's a beautiful thing. But part of me is kind of like, could you just decide to turn it up a notch and build like a massive badass thing, do it full time and change the world? And you could do that, and maybe you would like doing that, but maybe are you nervous, or like, is there a self-limiting?
I mean, there's things that make me nervous, right? Like, Do
you ever think about doing this? Like, do you ever toy with like this idea of like going full throttle on like building I
don't know. Well, I also don't know how I could possibly do more than what I'm already doing. Like there are ways, and I've had ideas of things to do, but I don't know how, like what I would need to do to possibly put more.
Well, just like a matter of the mindset that you were talking about. Like, do you ever think about, like, what if I just got super serious mentally and was like, I just decided to start seeing myself as someone who's going to be fucking massive in 10 years.
I don't think I can.
It's just not you.
It's just doesn't feel organic at all.
Cool. Well, that's good that you know yourself. It's just interesting.
Yeah. It would be cool, but also like I get so spooked at random stuff too. And sometimes I need to take a step back. Like I had someone, and this is totally innocuous and I don't dislike this person at all, like email me And it's like someone I've spoken to like maybe 2 times ever and like refer to me as their friend. And I was like, what? Like,
Oh shit, I just did that. Are we friends? Sorry.
no, we're friends.
Are we?
But I mean,
Okay,
it was
cool.
like truly someone who had like left a long comment on a post and then like emailed me like several
Right.
months later.
Right,
and like
right.
stuff like that makes me think
The
like,
whole parasocial thing is
Yeah,
weird. It's
I'm like-
weird, and it is.
Yeah.
It does take a toll on people
yeah.
emotionally.
And I think I deal with it probably, and I let probably most people in, and I'm very like relaxed about it. But sometimes it's like, sometimes people get mad at you too, which is the other thing because they've sort of invented a relationship that isn't really there.
You said in a recent post that you used to, for a while, you disliked NFTs, and now you like NFTs.
Yeah.
So what changed there, and how do you see that?
I didn't realize how strong some of the communities are. And I thought that was really cool. And I didn't realize that there was sort of like a role playing aspect to it.
Okay.
Like they're like these NFTs like sometimes have like personalities that people have like, you know, they've these affinities to. And I'm like, oh, that's actually really cool.
And you're rocking the Milady profile pic.
Yeah.
How many Miladies do you have?
Just one.
Okay, me too.
Yeah.
We're plebs, man. I think the floor price just went up today to like 0.8 ETH or something like that.
That's great.
We're getting priced out. We're plebs. We only have one. I'm like, I keep thinking about buying more. So how did you get into Milady? How do you read that? Like, what's going on with that?
Oh my God, what happened? Like I kept seeing them and then I just like became obsessed with them.
And what's your read? What do you see
I
in them?
don't know, because like now I'm in all these like Milady group chats and I'm like, I just don't spend enough time in there.
Yeah.
There's this other NFT series, Tojiba or something.
No, okay.
It's like these little computers, and I think those are pretty cool.
Oh yeah, I think Barrett had that guy on his
Yeah.
podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he did too. I
Yeah.
think I
Is
was
it cool?
looking it up. So the Discord server was cool, and you can like earn cigarettes and stuff, like digital cigarettes, and I like the like gamification.
I just fucking hate Discord. It's like way too chaotic, and there's
Yeah, I
way too
don't-
many of them. This is why I'm an Urbit maxi now, because it's like the based chill Discord.
Yeah.
And you're kind of into Urbit now, so you've been like, I see you've been like, brandishing your @p, your Urbit handle. How did you get into that recently, or what's made you like pay more attention to that recently?
I don't remember. It's been on my radar for a long time.
Yeah.
I've been to a few Urbit meetups, and I just like never, I just never tried it out. I like even like pitched them like, hey, can I make some commercials for you guys?
Yeah.
Like I don't even know what I was thinking. I'm like, I don't know the brand at all. It just seems like I might have been like drunk or something and just emailed them. But yeah, I don't know. I think the culture seems interesting, but I'm not super deep into it. I know that you are all about it.
So
though.
what's the psychology behind why you've been kind of brandishing it more? You've been kind of like flirting with it more. Like what's your interest or motivation?
So they're doing, I don't know if this is like a secret or anything if I'm blowing up their spot, but they're doing this magazine, right?
I think we could talk about
Yeah,
it.
okay. So they're doing this magazine, and I'm doing a book review for it, and I think it just reached the point where I was like talking about things that sound like Urbit. I'm writing this article for them, and it felt like rude that I just like wasn't on it.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, so I was like,
Interesting.
all right.
So for people who don't know, we're talking about the Mars review of books. I think it's kind of low key, but I think it's not super secret. Like Noah, the editor, his Twitter handle is Mars Reviewer. So that's like, he's basically
Okay.
saying it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is going to be interesting. People should look out for that. There'll definitely be a lot of overlap with the podcast and the authors in that. And I don't know if this is secret either, but there's going to be an Urbit week in NYC around
cool.
May 20th. If that's secret, all right, you heard it here first. I mean, they're going to have to publicize it pretty soon. So I'm going to be in New York for a week around May 20th. By the way, if you're watching or listening and you're going to be in New York, save the dates. There are going to be some events and stuff. So you going to go out for that by any chance? Can you be in New York around May 20th?
Yeah.
You should.
Maybe. I'll try.
I kind of want to hear more gossip about the NPCC thing because I wasn't there, and I was
Okay.
I was actually a little salty that I wasn't invited.
You don't need
so,
to
No, I know.
invited.
Dude. Well, I don't want to sound like a cocky asshole or anything, but I'm kind of at a point where I only go to things if I'm invited. Like I'm not going
I
to
know
be
what you mean.
I'm not going to be an attendee at some conference, but if you invite me, I'll go. And if you don't
Yeah.
invite me, then you're on my shit list. It's
I
kind
mean-
of how I think about it.
I think this, I don't know how much cash they had to fly people out is the thing. I think they might have flown out like filmmakers.
Yeah, well, I should have been on the fucking list.
Why didn't you submit a film?
Not to do film shit, just to be there. I'm just fucking around. I'm not that salty about it. But I didn't go because I wasn't invited, basically.
Okay.
And I'm friendly with the people who put it on, so I'm just giving them shit. But Obviously, I'm not very close friends with them, but I'm, I thought we were on friendly terms, whatever. It's all good. But I want to hear just more about, because it was interesting, and you have great takes when it comes to just like interpreting cultural moments. What do you make of this kind of weird, it's weird to me that in New York, there's this like new scene, which is very independent, kind of schizoid, very kind of anti-establishment, but there seems to be just in New York always at all times and places, there's always this kind of gravitational pull back towards like prestige and institutions, and everyone's mental model is always this kind of like instinct that things will re-territorialize on like big brands and prestige outlets.
It's true.
Yeah, and whereas out in Texas it feels so different. Like I don't know if you have takes on the difference of vibe or whatever, but like out here it feels like truly like the Wild West. Like no one I work with here and hang out with and talk with, like no one here gives a fuck about like if they're gonna get a mention in the New Yorker, or like if they're or like it's just seriously and genuinely not on the radar of people's minds at all. Here it's just like fucking crypto, make money, be free, buy land, do crazy shit, make a DAO, fuck around.
You're not running into people who work for the New Yorker at parties here, which is a really big difference.
Yeah.
I think this attitude is for a lot of reasons, but part of it is just proximity. And I think the reason that it's actually smart to pay attention to these downtown scenes, even if they seem ineffectual or derivative or whatever. And I'm not saying that they are. I'm saying even if they, even if that's your opinion, is because it always ends up informing, it always ends up informing larger culture. It trickles down. And when journalists, scrape for content, that's part of where they go. What I think is interesting now is like you have this sort of old guard that is irrelevant. And the scene's evolving. The reason that it is the way that it is because the stuff that used to be provocative is now, part of human resources, and you can't provoke anymore with it. Like it's not really interesting to be a leftist feminist, right? It's there's too much. It's oversaturated,
Right. Do you remember by any chance going back to the topic of the culture of confession that you wrote about, like, do you remember what now they meme it as, they call it like indie sleaze? Have you seen this meme? There's like an Instagram account called Indie Sleaze.
So much of this is like invented.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. Because I wonder what you know about it or what you think about it. Because I was thinking about this the other day, kind of connected to like this kind of reformation of the alt-lit vibe in the New York scenes that's happening now in a similar way to the Taolin thing, but with its own distinct characteristics. I was thinking back to how when I was coming up in like college and I was like, whatever, a hipster in Philadelphia or whatever, it was like, one thing that was very different was that photography was way more standard and expected. It was like there were party photographers everywhere. This was the thing. If you ever went to like a hipster nightclub or whatever, at that time, and I think this is more or less the same time as like the culture of confession, or it's what you call
like 2008.
that. Yeah, it's in the same period roughly. It's like there were always photographers, and no one was skittish about photography. It was like cool. You wanted the party photographer to like snap you, and then the day after the party everyone would be like on the websites looking to see if they were like in the photographer's like Facebook photos or whatever. Like, do you remember this? Were you like involved? Was that something like you lived through?
I remember it. I wasn't involved with it.
Okay.
I think I was too young at the time, but like I definitely remember being like, I wish I looked like Corey Kennedy,
Exactly.
Right. And I was aware of it from the internet.
So to me, I find this interesting because, and I just wonder what you think about it, because this is one big difference between then and now, despite the similarities, is sensitivity to things like photography and a kind of like instinctual wish for privacy and obscurity. Like to me, this is a very clear one. Back then it was cool and fun. Everyone wanted to be photographed, and that was it was expected. It was part of the fun. Nowadays, people I feel like are, I don't know what it is. Maybe you have a theory. Maybe it's a kind of like being kind of resentful towards like mass surveillance and Facebook tracking your data. And there's like this generalized vibe today of like being watched all the time, and the ubiquity of cell phone photography and all of that. That now there's this kind of cultural reaction to that, where when people go to parties, they don't want your fucking camera in their face. And that's almost seen as like an affront. It's like an invasion of privacy or whatever. Whereas back then it was cool. Yet now, that moment of party photography back then is now a hip meme. There's like an Instagram channel called Sleaze, and it's basically just photos from back then. So there's this very weird thing going on where right now people, and I could be wrong, maybe you see it totally different. I'm just guessing basically, but this is how I read it. There's this kind of generalized antipathy to things like photography and kind of artifacts and mementos of lived social experience.
Yeah.
There's a strong antipathy to the production of that stuff, and yet there's also this kind of unconscious longing for it. Because people are into this like Sleaze meme as a kind of retro meme.
Well, I think I'm gonna change positions a little bit. That was hurting my neck, but I think there is. They like the aesthetic. In terms of people not liking to be photographed, I think that's a few things. One, it's not that people don't want their image out there; they want to control their image, and you might look really bad in a photo. And people are actually really vicious if you do look bad in photos.
But this is the cool thing about Sleaze, and that's why it's called Sleaze, right? Because the people look gross, people look weird. It's like people vomiting from being too drunk and stuff like that. They look kind of ugly, but in retrospect, that's cool. It like seems sexy and cool that they did that.
Well, I think people would do a selfie of them, or like a staged portrait of them vomiting where they have a lot of control over the curation. I just don't think they would want that.
It's a great point. I think you're absolutely right. In this age of Instagram filters and where everything is super manicured, that's one of the reasons why this doesn't hit.
I think it's not even the it being manicured or people like needing to appear beautiful or something. They just want the control over it.
Right.
And the other piece of this is, and this is probably more true of your circles, there's probably folks who are interested in the kinds of parties or events you attend, and they don't, in certain circles, you get branded as problematic. Like, there's people who I'm like real life friends with, who I like, and I have no problem with anything they do. And I'll interact with them like in public, both in the physical world and on Twitter or on Instagram or wherever. And yet there's still a gnawing feeling in the back of my mind, like, you know what, if I ever, for some reason, got a high profile job or something, or, was in a movie, not that that's going to happen, but you know what I mean? If I was ever in the public eye, the fact that I'm friends with this person who I have no problem with and I would defend, and can sleep at night that I can defend them, it's going to be dredged up and it's going to be used against me. And I hate that I'm even thinking about this.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So that's funny. That's a big difference between you and I, because I feel so completely past all of that. Like, I don't think about those things anymore at all. Like, I feel like I'm truly just outside of society, basically, at this point.
I'm jealous. I wish I was.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Tell me a little bit about Delicious Tacos. Who is that? And I'm not saying dox him, but like, how did you get connected with him? What's his story, like, without doxing him, whatever?
A lot of people know who he is. I don't. I actually probably know the least about him of most people, but he's I don't want to cheapen his work by calling him a manosphere blogger, but he does write fiction, but also sort of like memoir or autofiction.
But it's like very pornographic, right?
It's very sexual.
Yeah, I can't fuck with that. But it's like
it's out there.
I just can't. I don't even like movies with a lot of sex in them. I'm like, you talk about sex negativity a lot. I'm like honestly pretty sex negative.
Yeah.
Like, not even as a polemic. Like, I don't really care that much about the talking points or the debates. I'm not like a representative of some like tribe or something. But emotionally, psychologically, like I don't even like sex in movies, let alone like reading like pornographic literature. So I've heard that Delicious Tacos is really cool and a good writer and an interesting badass guy, but I can't read that stuff. It's not my taste. So I want to learn more about like why is he cool? What's he all about?
So I struggle to read some of his more pornographic stuff too, because it just feels like, often it's real people, and then I'm automatically sort of like there's no distance, and now I feel like I kind of know him, and it like complicates how I consume the work. But I do like his advice, the way he does an advice column. Okay. Even though I pretty much disagree with him on everything, but he's so funny. He's just so funny. And he's so black-pilled.
How did you get connected with him?
We had him on after the orgy. RIP, it's not coming back. People always ask. So just going to say this for the audience. But we had him on after the orgy, and my ex co-host was a Welbeck scholar, and she thinks his writing's very similar to Welbeck's, and it was a really interesting conversation. And we had a very provocative title for it, and we sort of stayed friendly after that. and he'd been peripherally on my radar just from Twitter and just being online all the time. And then Forever Mag was, they reached out to me and they're like, do you want to do an advice column for our, I think, December issue or winter issue? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And they were like, what do you think of doing it with Delicious Tacos? I was like, no problem.
Okay, so they suggested it.
Yeah, and then it did really well. And so I was like, let's just keep doing it. And so we kept doing it.
Okay, interesting. Cool. And why did you shut down after the orgy?
It was just like, well, first of all, my ex-host is a lawyer, so she, she's not. I'm working like a marketing job, so I'm more. I have more time to be like, I'll take 2 hours off in the middle of the day and then make it up later. She can't do that. And then I feel like we were sort of on different wavelengths about some of the content. She's really interested in literature, and I think our best episodes were deconstructing works of literature, but like. It just felt like I'm doing this internet culture thing and she's sort of doing another thing, and it just fell apart.
That's the hardest thing about collaborations is they always just something they're fragile.
Yeah.
This is like what Chat for God was for me. It was kind of about to blow. It was kind of blowing up, honestly, and I thought it was really amazing content. But Ashley and I just couldn't like get on the same page, which is totally fine. But
and it's like a weird thing to explain to people because
they're like they want more, they want more, and they're disappointed.
Well, but also they're like, oh, so do you guys hate each other? It's like it's just like sometimes there's just not the right professional chemistry, and I think you don't know what that means until it happens, and it's like never like a personal.
Oh, how about Compact Mag? What's their story? And like, because you wrote an article for them.
I did write an article for them.
What do you know about them?
I mean, they seem like they're just sort of filling this space where, I feel like for a long time, people have been sort of defensively right-wing, let's say. And it's like people who like aren't really right-wing sort of feel like they need to say they're right-wing because there's nowhere else to go. And I think Compact is sort of acknowledging the weird space that's created, and they're kind of honestly saying like, we believe different things, but we're just we're against sort of the current order. They're post-liberal, but being post-liberal it can mean so many different things,
right?
And they're allowing for all these strange bedfellows for there to be a little bit more like diversity, and that diversity is acknowledged, and that's my take on it, at least.
Yeah. They're kind of like going for like religiously conservative, like economic leftism. Is that? It's like my very vague read from afar.
I think it's a mix.
Yeah. Okay, I was just curious if they had any gossip about them or whatever.
No gossip.
No.
It's cool that Nina's a great editor. I'm glad. I'm happy to see her.
Was she your editor for your article?
Yeah.
Cool.
I enjoyed working with her. She's cool, and I'm happy that it's doing well.
Yeah. No, she's awesome.
Yeah.
So one of your big ideas, probably your big idea, your main idea, has to do with sex negativity. This is something you've been writing about and talking about for probably the longest. I would say, if you have one kind of key theme in your work, it's this theme of sex negativity and just generally this feeling a lot of people have that there either is right now or is going to be, or there's a kind of mounting backlash against the sex positivity that we've kind of been drowned in for many years now. Why don't you give me and the audience give us the TLDR on your views there, and then we'll talk about that for a little bit.
So I embarrassingly almost, I've noticed that I'm I think that the sort of meta idea is the pendulum swings back and forth, and I'm the pendulum person, right?
Okay.
So I had this, I felt like I was like having like a seizure or something. I just like one day I like wrote this blog post, and it's like filled with typos. It's totally insane. I've never gone back and looked at it, and it just did very well. And it just keeps getting cited. And in this blog post, I'm like, sex positivity has basically become passé. We're oversaturated in these attitudes and in this content. And there's no going further than we already have. So we're going to start reacting to it. And, there's going to be many expressions of this. But this is mostly, it's going to be how we talk about sex, how it's expressed on social media. Sort of the zeitgeist is going to change. Does this change lived behaviors? I don't know, because we're in a sex recession, and yet we're also completely oversaturated with basically porn. So, I mean, I don't know I don't know how it's going to impact behaviors, but I do think that it's going to be tacky to be really open about your sex life.
Well, and do you think this, you often talk about this as something that you see as coming, but is it already here? Like,
I mean, it's for them. It's not evenly distributed, but it is here. Like, I don't think you could, I would say like even 5 years ago, maybe less, you could build a career off the back of, like, especially as a woman, being very frank about your sex life.
Right.
If you did that now, it would be like very, very, passe.
Yeah, it's interesting. Kind of going back to our discussion about the current literary counterculture.
Yeah.
Compared to the alt-lit moment. You could argue that one big difference is that there's way less sex involved.
Yeah.
Like the whole indie sleaze thing I was talking about before, that had a lot of sexual kind of energy, right? Like those cool party pics that were so fashionable back then. It had like sexual undertones, right? It was like who's sleeping with who and who's going to sleep with who. And that was kind of like part of the drama, part of the subculture. Whereas now it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, I am ultimately, I'm just a middle-aged man who lives in Austin, Texas. I don't fucking know what's going on, but
yeah,
it sure seems to me that the literary countercultures right now are relatively sexless. Like,
maybe, I don't know.
I'm sure people are having sex, but it's not like a big part of it. Like when I look at like, people like Honor Levy, or I look at like, NPCC Fest, there's like nothing that I see or hear that stands out that has anything to do with like this person is fucking this person and this is interesting to me, or this is dramatic, or this is that, like, that's just not part of the subplot. It's not part of the characters. It's not part of the intrigue at all. Or am I missing something?
You can't eliminate it, but I think it's probably not part of the branding, maybe. Like, whereas,
but it used to be, right? You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah,
like Megan Boyle and Tao Lin, like there were just way more sexual aspects to it.
Right. Like, you still probably need to be like fuckable, frankly, to reach a certain level of success. Like, it's and not being so is likely to hold you back.
Sure.
However, it's not like you have to be like a very, a beautiful or young or, somewhere at the intersection of the two, woman who like is kind of chaste, or like if you're not chaste, we don't have to know, and we shouldn't know a thing about what's going on. And I think that's the major change. Like, it can happen as lasciviously and as frequently as you so wish, as long as, we don't, don't ask, don't tell, kind of.
Well, that's an interesting thing you just said, because I've often wondered if in this culture of sex negativity where like it's not cool to talk about sex, it's not cool to be openly, flaunting that and playing that game, I actually have this bad feeling that there's like weird stuff in the background. There
has to be.
Especially when you think about this kind of schizoid style that's like very fashionable. I have this kind of fear or hunch that in a couple years, stuff's going to emerge from this like weird literary underground where there's going to be like weird grooming things. There's going to be weird like brainwashing things. There's going to be weird cult things that are probably going on right now, frankly, that people don't know about, but it's going to have sexual aspects. It's going to have like brainwashing aspects. Because I think because sexuality doesn't go away, right? Those energies, those motivations never go away. And it's a basic fact of underground youth cultures, or, undergrounds in general, youth cultures in general. Like, sexual desire and libido is always one of the big drivers of it all, right? So if sex is being suppressed from the visuals, from the culture, from the vibe, you can bet your bottom dollar it's being displaced and managed and probably manipulated somewhere. And one of the big problems with this whole schizoid like style of thinking and writing is that it makes you susceptible to shit like that. Like, this is one of the reasons why I think so. Yeah, because like the whole schizo style, what it is it's extreme openness. I mean that in terms of like the big five personality traits, and it's well documented that the big pitfall with schizotypal attitudes and behaviors and personality types, extremely high openness people, is a high vulnerability to manipulation.
But a lot of people are performing, right? It'd be one thing if it was gathering people who were, actually like this in, a group, but they're not, right?
Yeah.
So it's, if they were like, I dated someone with schizophrenia for a long time, and like, there's no putting him in a group. Like, if you're and he was pretty high functioning. And there's if you actually are schizoid, you're not. It's just not happening. And
yeah, well, if you're like actually struggling with schizophrenia, yes, but schizotypal traits,
but they don't actually have. It's
different.
It's a fad, right? So they're not actually a magnet for people who have these. They're like, it's like the autism thing, right? Like a lot of people.
Right, it's fashionable to be autistic, but like most people who talk about that are not.
And even if it's something that's sort of out of their control, what they really are, it's probably cripplingly socially awkward. And that's it feels, that's when we say autism, that's what we mean. Like these people don't have special interests. Like there's a difference between I'm fixated on something because I have an addictive personality, or I'm fixated on something because I take a lot of Adderall. And I mean, in all seriousness, like if you need Adderall to pursue your special interest, it's not a special interest.
Huh? That's a good line.
Yeah. Like in all seriousness. And I think I'm very sympathetic to people who are like, I'm cripplingly socially awkward and I feel as though it is a disability, and it might be, but it's not autism.
What do you make of the post-rationalist like subculture on Twitter?
Okay, you want to talk about actually autistic?
Say more.
I would buy that a lot of those people are autistic and not just awkward.
Now, you didn't go to the vibecamp thing, did you?
I did not.
You thought about it. I thought about it. I was like, I'm pretty sure that I'm not gonna. This is not for me.
Yeah. Well,
It goes back to what I said before. I only go to things that I'm like explicitly invited to speak at.
I would have gone if I knew how to drive and it was closer to Austin. I shower like 3 times a day. Like that's a real number. And I'm like very sensitive to like not even other people smelling bad, but like the thought that I might smell bad.
Wow.
Yeah, like if it means like I'm gonna like lose my hair at 40 and like because I overshower, that's the price I'm willing to pay.
Is that real? Like hot water supposedly makes your hair?
I don't know. You hear all sorts of conspiracy theory. You're not supposed to get your hair wet or something. But like, yeah, like it just seemed too dirty for me. And then more than
too dirty.
Yeah, more than that, like I don't know if those people like me very much. And it was sort of like, oh, you're in group. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. And I think a lot of them don't realize what some of my values and beliefs are. And they're occasionally surprised and reach out to me like, did you know this is really hurtful? And it's like, I don't want to hurt anyone, but like, I'm not just saying some things to be provocative. I'm saying them because I believe them, or like, it's so second nature to me. And I don't think they're like surprised. Like, I think for some reason, people thought I was sort of like a burner Berkeley type, or, and I don't know if it's because of stuff I posted when I was younger, because I've sort of been in these circles for for a long time. Or if it's because like I kind of lost my mind for like 3 months after I got divorced. And I was a little bit weirder then. But it was like 3 months. And I don't know if that's what, I don't know what the genesis of this is, but there is a sense that I'm like, very sort of like Berkeley in my beliefs, which I'm not. Like I don't like to hug people. I'm very kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, one thing that's interesting about that whole world right now is that I think that vibecamp weekend thing they did had this really dramatic effect of like actually showing a lot of people that there are different subgroups in this weird like supposed like Twitter subculture. Right. Like people imagine that you, me, the vibecamp people were like all in the same Twitter subculture. Not true at all. And it required like some IRL hangouts and people posting photos and talking about their experiences to really drive this home. Like I had a sense of this, which is why I didn't go to that thing. Yeah. No disrespect. I want people to have fun and do their own thing, let your freak flag fly and all that. Even if I'm not like the type who has a freak flag that I like to fly, well, I guess I do in my own way, whatever. But my point being that if you look at like the media that came out of that, like it's the weirdest thing, and the kind of I think worst thing about that whole thing was like it seems like you had a lot of really nerdy people. No disrespect, I'm friends with a lot of nerds, and being nerdy school nowadays, but it was like people who are socially awkward and nerdy got together, and a lot of them like had sex with each other, and now they all think they're sexy, and this like really is upset. Well, it's like it kind of is upsetting to me because like they're all posting selfies now. It's like these people that I followed, who I thought like I didn't really know them, I didn't know what they were about, but they had some interesting weird takes, and like I was more or less content to kind of see us all like vaguely in a weird swimming in the same sea. It's like now these people, because they got laid once, they're posting selfies of themselves, and they think they're like fucking hot, but like, dude, you're not hot. You're like a middle-aged man, and like you're not hot. Like, don't post selfies, dude.
I think these people have these people that seem so dismissive. I think that subculture has a lot of sex, so it's not like they got laid once. And that's another thing. Like, that's not like, I don't want to, like, I talked about my sex life a little bit on After the Orgy, and like that was very uncomfortable for me. And like, you know, like I don't want to share my trauma. You know, I don't want to do an authentic relating game. I don't want to hug people. I don't want to see anyone naked ever.
Yeah, I want to repress my trauma like all good men
I want
do.
to forget it. Like, I don't want to know who I was 10 years ago. That she's dead. It's not one fluid movement.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's like, I'm very uptight in certain ways, and I don't want, if it needs to be like unpacked, I don't want to unpack it there. You know?
Well, I think I think what's happening with the digital media is that over time, digital media is separating and distinguishing the different wrinkles within different subcultures. So it's fragmentation after fragmentation. It's like a branching tree, right? And as digital media combines with time and sleuthing and sorting, what's happening is people are able to actually locate themselves in increasingly well-defined niches, and then niches are splitting into smaller niches. And I think that's what's kind of going on here. You know, it's interesting. We talked about schizo types, and we also talked about autistic types. You know, in the scientific literature, is like a lot of people see these as basically two ends, two opposing poles. And it's really interesting to think about that, because we're kind of talking about both on the internet subcultures today. There are representatives of both, like the angelicism and Barrett Avner types. Like these are actually schizotypal personality types. And that's not good or bad. I'm saying just objectively from a scientific perspective, these are people with schizotypal traits, and they're doing their own thing in their own writing style. And of course they vibe with each other, and that's a beautiful thing. And then you have the more autistic people doing things like vibecamp.
Yeah.
And it is pretty interesting that these things map out on pretty like scientifically predictable lines.
Yeah. And there's also borderlines. Like I mean, and I kind of think like you're either artistic or borderline sort of in today, you know, abusing those labels totally.
Well, I feel like you and I, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you and I are kind of in the same camp in that we're basically, we lean like somewhat socially conservative. But we're we're socially liberal when it comes to making friends and like having an open mind towards new weird stuff, and we like that. We find we're kind of novelty seeking, and we're kind of high openness in that regard, and we like weird stuff, and we're kind of non-judgmental in that way. But when it comes to like disgust sensitivity and just basic kind of the psychology around values, we're more socially conservative. Basically, is that fair
I'd
to say?
I've dipped into, I've tested my own limits a few times, and I don't want to pretend like I've never, like done things or said, but
same.
these days for sure, like I'm increasingly.
So what would you call our camp then? This is an interesting question, because I feel like the whole angelicism, Barrett Avner subculture, it's fairly coherent. Like you have a sense of like, you can point to those people and you can call it whatever. You can call it something that sounds like schizoid or whatever. Like you kind of get it. That makes sense. And then you can point to the post-rationalist vibecamp people, and you're like, okay, yeah, those people are in a circle. That's their own thing. But I feel like for people like us, like what do you call that? How do you think about that niche? Like, how do you think about your own kind of subspace in like the digital media landscape?
It's difficult because I don't actually know, right? Like, and I'll try to enter spaces, and it's rarely a good fit. But speaking of Nina, I think she's also in this sort of like, I wouldn't call her like right wing or anything, but she has a socially conservative sensibility. Yeah. That means that, she's sort of homeless in a sense.
Right.
Maybe it just doesn't have a name yet. I think there's a lot of people sort of like us where they're sort of some of them are sort of shuffled into different right wing circles, and it's like not quite the right fit, but they have something like the way they approach gender or sexuality kind of, you know, that's what the core of their writing or something, and it keeps them there.
Right.
But there's like just not a good name for it.
We need it. We need this because in a way, like I'm curious about this because this is like the thesis for this podcast, basically. Like this is what I want to get more and more narrow on and understand better and better and really, really nail it down, because this is like what I want to represent. It's something like trad values, but like wild, like personality or something. It's like trad in terms of values and like open and chaotic in terms of like ideas or thinking or like I don't know, but I want to pin it down.
There's just not a name for people who have these kind of like middle of the road, because you know, I wouldn't say that like you're super extreme, and I don't think I'm super extreme either. Like sort of the values that have settled in on, you know, after, you know, now like there's no way I'm not an adult, you know what I mean? Like they're traditional, but they're what my mom taught me, you know what I mean? It's very sort of like normative and like it's like uncontroversial or like not really provocative if it was 1994.
I'm curious how you see kind of the content landscape, like for yourself, maybe more generally. You know, you're obviously in the thick of it. You're super online. You have a Substack. You do a ton of all different kinds of things. You do podcasting. You do the Substack. And as you described before, for you, it's kind of like a hobby, but you definitely are passionate about it and you put a lot of work into it. Are there kind of trends going on that you would bring to our attention? Do you think the Substack phenomena is here to stay and it's only going to get bigger? Do you see that as like a short-term blip? Anything at all that you see kind of coming up next or on the horizon when it comes to being an internet writer or
Sure.
a creator?
So as far as Substack goes, I don't really know. I don't think podcasts will ever die, though. I'm bullish on podcasts. And
Why?
Because I think people think that it's like they don't realize it's a form. You know that there can never be too many. Like there can never be too many movies. There can never be too many podcasts. What could happen is for whatever reason, it becomes harder to consume it. Like something's going to need, for podcasts to become irrelevant, something's going to need to replace it. And I think that people don't really realize that. I think they think of it like, oh, there's already so many podcasts. Like, would I recommend someone start a true crime podcast if they want to be a career podcaster? No, that moment has passed. Or a Marxist podcaster, that moment has also passed. To start a podcast, there's no like, you know, there's no limit on how many podcasts. It's like what, you know, you have to just find the calibrate your content for the moment. I think culture war stuff is going to change.
Okay, how so?
I think it's going to be more about our relationship with technology. And as I said in Compact, I think there's two things that I think are going to start ruffling feathers. The first thing is the detransitioner moment is upon us, and it makes total sense because we're a decade out from Tumblr, and again my usual disclaimer is that whatever, people know that I'm not a transphobe, so what I always feel like I need to protect myself somehow, but so I think the detransitioner moment is going to be about healthcare, and it's going to be about the way we use technology and how that affects our self-perception. But it's still a little too radioactive, so it's going to move the needle, but it's not going to be the big thing. I think the really big thing is dating app fatigue. And then between the detransitioner thing is sort of the canary in the coal mine. And the culture war battles are still going to exist, but I think they're going to shift and become more about the way we use tech than about whatever the hell it's about right now.
And how is it going to manifest? Like what? Because I totally think you're right. The dating apps seem to be really bad for most parties involved. But what is it going to produce? What do you think is going to be the manifestation of this backlash?
I don't know. I don't know yet. I think that incel ideology might be like more mainstreamed. It definitely already is. Like I've both heard this happening with other people and experienced it myself, like talking to totally like normie friends about just incel talking points because they feel so marginalized by dating and they have no romantic existence, or if they do, it's completely humiliating.
I wonder if there's a connection between the dating app horror show and the new internet subcultures that maybe no one wants to talk about. Like we were talking about how the literary countercultures are kind of strangely sexless, or they seem so. I wonder if there's like a kind of interesting relationship going on there with like how many of these people who are like, extremely online, political dissidents in like edgelord accelerationist Discord servers and stuff, like how many of those people are kind of like incels, basically. Like, and I don't mean that in a mean way. I'm friends with a lot of these people, but it's like we have in our minds this image of the incel who's like, this like super fat loser guy in his basement who's like thinking about shooting up the movie theater. That's like what most people think of when they think of incels. And then we think of these like, crazy, wild, young guys on Discord servers flipping NFTs and like trading altcoins. Like, is it an interesting possible hypothesis that actually these two people are more alike than people realize?
Well, I mean, there's sexless people and then there's incels, and like there's not a single incel ideology, right? But I think it's a useful like umbrella term.
Yeah.
And it's like, are they, is their sexlessness something that they just ignore, or is it something that they're sort of unpacking, or it feels like, temporary somehow, even if it's not? I think a lot of people just don't have sex, right? Does that make them incels per se? I don't know. Probably not. I get so much heat for this, but I identify my younger self as a femcel. But because, and it was a brief period of time. I certainly like wasn't like a femcel for, years and years and years, or like most of my 20s or anything. I was married. But I identified as a femcel in my early 20s and my teen years. One, it was literally the truth, but also like my sexlessness or like my feeling of like undesirability was a component of my worldview. And that's why I use the term, because it's like, was there something special about me? No, but that I adopted it as how I navigated the world, and it informed how I thought about other issues. That's what made me a femcel, besides it being a literal truth.
Okay, fascinating. So your larger theory of inceldom is that this is not so much about these like highly marginalized, outcast, loser guys that people have in their mind. It's more a kind of like values driven,
totally
cultural antipathy towards sex that's going to be producing more and more incels.
The most like classical incel I've ever known, had girlfriends and a sex life when I knew him. It's not someone I speak to anymore, because he was super black-pilled, and I as a woman it was very hard to be his friend. But like he had a very normal social life. He wasn't ugly. He had a great job, decent. I'm not going to say he was the most handsome dude in the world, but decent looking guy. And he had an incel worldview, and he was, openly misogynist. He would use that word to describe himself. And it just, it just was what it was. Like,
right.
So, I think that there are a lot of true cells, which people who like are truly celibate. But being anywhere on the incel spectrum, it has to inform how you think about everything else. Being sexless is a different thing.
Well, that's a killer thought to end on. That's a lot to chew on. DefaultFriend.substack.com. People can go subscribe to your newsletter if you're watching or listening. And anything else you want to share with the audience, let them know about?
I don't think so.
Is that the best place people can find you? Just defaultfriend.substack.com, and Twitter, of course.
Yeah, always on Twitter.
Thank you so much for coming out to Austin. This was super fun.
Thanks for having
me. We're doing the Other Life meetup, the Other Life / Urbit social tonight. You're going to be there. Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Well, this is really fun. You're only the third victim, and I do think you're the very first person to be on the podcast 3 times. So congratulations for that distinction.
Thanks for having me.
All right. That's a wrap.